Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Winecast. You can't talk or learn about wine at a serious level for very long before Phylloxera comes up in the conversation. But the first time you hear about it, it's likely to take you by surprise, and you probably will have a lot of questions. What is it? What exactly does it have to do with wine, and why is it such a big deal anyway? With those questions in mind, let's have a look at Phylloxera on this cast, the little bug that almost ended wine culture as we know it. For starters, let's get the who, what, where, why, and when out of the way. Phylloxera is the name of an aphid that's native to the eastern United States and preys on the roots of grapevines. It has an extraordinarily complex life cycle involving 18 separate stages, with the bug changing to 4 separate forms over the course of that cycle. It got to Europe and other parts of the world in the 19th century by hitching a ride on cuttings of grape species native to America that were exported for cultivation as crops or as ornamental vines. Over time, the American grape species that Phylloxera lived on developed, thanks to evolution, a resistance to the devastating effects that the bug could have on vine roots. Vitis vinifera, the species of European grapes that most wine is made from, didn't have the time to evolve its own resistance to Phylloxera, and thereby hangs our tale. In 1866, grapevines in vineyards in southern France began dying without a clear cause. It would take a little time and some research, but Professor Jules-Émile Planchon of the University of Montpellier, not far from the Côte du Rhône that was hard hit by this blight, made the connection between the deaths of the vines and aphids that he found living on the roots of still healthy vines. What kept the researchers from making the connection sooner was the bug's complicated life cycle that included abandoning the roots while the plant was still relatively healthy, but would later succumb to bacterial and fungal infections because of the damage done by the parasite. Despite Planchon's brilliant observations, it would be a while before many of his colleagues came to agree with him, and many of them saw the bugs as not the cause of the problem, but as opportunistic pests that were preying on already weakened vines. Confirmation of the bug-disease connection came in 1869 when a vigneron, or wine grower, named Louis Faucon noticed that his affected vines rebounded after an unexpected flood hit his vineyards. Experiments by Planchon showed that flooding could drown the aphids in just a few weeks, and, if done early enough, the vines would return to a state of health. While this made it clear that the bugs were the cause of the vine deaths, it wasn't a promising solution to the problem because, as you may recall from the Burgundy cast, for example, many of the best vineyard sites in the world are on hillsides with good drainage that aren't easily flooded. Another breakthrough came when Phylloxera was identified with an already named American aphid, Dactylosphaera vidifolii, which, since it was named first, remains the bug's official name, with Phylloxera being just what everyone else calls it. This identification was important, not only because it showed where the bug came from, but gave a clue as to how to fight it because American vines seemed to have a resistance to it. Clues about fighting it were in great demand because within a decade, Phylloxera was detected outside of France in most of Europe, as well as California and even Australia, and pesticides weren't doing much to stop the bugs. Once it was clear that resistant American vines were the answer, several ideas involving them were floated as solutions, each with varying levels of success. The first answer, to plant American grape species, didn't go over very well at all. Though the vines generally did well in Europe and continued to resist Phylloxera, the flavors produced by many American species were usually considered too strong, had a kind of grapey character, or were otherwise off-putting to a lot of consumers. A more palatable solution was to crossbreed American species with Vitis vinifera to produce hybrids that had the American species' disease resistance along with a flavor profile more like the European varieties. This approach was partially successful, and to this day, hybrids of American species and vinifera remain popular on the east coast of the United States, and in a much more limited way among some European wine drinkers. But at the end of the day, the hybrids never could equal the complexity and subtlety of the vinifera grapes. The real answer, which was first suggested as early as 1869 but took another half a decade to catch on, came when someone had the idea to graft European grape varieties onto Phylloxera-resistant American rootstocks. As you can see on the right, grafting is done by connecting a scion, the darker colored of the two parts of the plant, to a rootstock, the lighter colored, by cutting a notch and fitting the two together and allowing the cut to heal, forming a graft union. Used for millennia in fruit trees, this technique allowed multiple species of fruit, or even different fruit, to be grown on the same tree. So it was known that European scions would continue to produce a European grape variety even if they were connected to American roots. Though it took a while to implement, this proved to be the only effective way of managing Phylloxera, and it's still in use today. The damage done by Phylloxera was massive. By some estimates, France's wine production alone was reduced by 75% before grafting was successfully introduced. But were there any areas that were unaffected by the disease? The answer is yes, but only a few, and these areas are considered special because they're the only places you can still find Vitis vinifera, or European varieties, planted on their own roots. The most famous example is Chile, which has never had Phylloxera at all and seems to have been spared because it was isolated by the Pacific Ocean on the west and mountains and desert on the east and the north. South Australia, including the famous Barossa Valley, is also Phylloxera-free, probably due to its isolation from other wine regions, and the Australian government aims to keep it that way through the use of an aggressive quarantine system. In the U.S., Washington State is also largely Phylloxera-free, something that's been chalked up to the sandy soils in which most Washington grapes are grown, and which the Phylloxera aphid seems to have a hard time getting around in. More mysteriously, some small vineyard sites throughout the world have remained Phylloxera-free, even while surrounded by sites that are filled with the bug, and it's often difficult to pin down a good reason why. But the question that many wine consumers want answered is, do the ungrafted vines at these unaffected locations make better wine than the grafted vines almost everywhere else? This has turned out to be a really hard question to answer. On the one hand, many drinkers who've had a chance to sample wine made from ungrafted vines and then compare it to wine made from nearby grafted vines often report what they perceive to be noticeable differences in character and quality, with wine from the ungrafted vines usually getting the higher rating. On the other hand, the controlled scientific research that's out there, and it's still a pretty limited amount, doesn't back this up. A multi-year study begun in 1999 by Washington State University took advantage of Washington's freedom from Phylloxera and rigorously compared wine made from grapes grown on ungrafted vines with wine from grafted vines grown right next to each other and under identical conditions. And their conclusion was that there are no meaningful or even practical differences in wine character and quality. So what's going on here? Well, more research needs to be done before we really know, but I'm inclined to trust the scientific findings over the anecdotal ones. Other research has shown that expectations going into wine tasting can significantly affect your experience with the wine. And if tasters think that there should be a difference between grafted and ungrafted vines going in, it's not surprising that that's what they find. Also, a lot of these anecdotes come from small Phylloxera-free vineyard sites compared to neighboring, but not necessarily identical sites with Phylloxera. And if real differences in character and quality are demonstrated under controlled conditions, we still need to answer the question of whether the differences are coming from the rootstock or from the terroir. It's possible that the same terroir factors that leave one site free of Phylloxera are also contributing to the wine's quality from that site. Finally, keep in mind that while some Phylloxera-free areas are famous for their quality, the Barossa Valley comes to mind, other Phylloxera-free areas like Chile are still working to consistently produce wines of the same level of quality as some areas with grafted vines. But the last word has to be that more research is needed. Thanks again for joining me for another Winecast. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments, especially if you've ever had a chance to sample wines made from grafted and ungrafted vines from the same area. I'm your host, the Unknown Winecaster, and I'm out. Enjoy the grape, but always enjoy it responsibly.